Property settlement. There are so many elements. There's contributions, financial and non-financial, that need to be considered before, during, and after. But sometimes things get forgotten and left out. And today we're going to be talking about the 4 things that you might not realize are contributions when it comes to parenting for your property settlement. Hello, Mum.
Hello, Laura. Hello, everyone.
And today, Mum, we're going to be talking about things that people do tend to write in and ask about and say, is this a contribution? Or they completely forget. And before we get into those...
Hello, I'm Laura Furiosi, divorced mother of 3, and I'm here with my mother, Lynette Galvin, with 35 years experience in family law. You're listening to the Divorce Course podcast. Through our candid discussions, we hope to help you through your divorce or de facto separation. We will be answering the most commonly asked questions and covering the stages and steps that you will face on your way to freedom.
If anybody's interested in learning about the basic parts of contributions, you can go and listen to our contributions episode, or you can do our course where we take you through how to figure out what your contributions were. But Mum, can you just explain to everybody what is a contribution and how it factors into property settlement in Australia?
Okay, so the process for working out a property settlement in Australia involves quantifying or valuing the assets, finding out what the property pool is, then looking at contributions and then at future needs and so forth. And contributions are the second element in the court doing a property law settlement.
Does that affect the percentage of the whole property pool? If you've contributed more, you get more of the property pool in the divorce?
You get an adjustment in your favour because you've put that contribution in.
Okay. All right. So you've just touched on that you can contribute before the marriage, during the marriage, or after, or de facto relationship. Can you give us some examples of contributions that usually people do remember and do argue about and get included in their percentage of the property pool?
Yep. The biggest one is if someone owned a house or some other real estate, or even if it was heavily mortgaged before they got together. That's a massive contribution, depending on the dollar size of it, okay?
Right.
Another one might be savings in the bank, so those are usually before contributions.
Mm-hmm.
During the relationship, people might get personal injuries, benefits claims, lump sums. They might get redundancy packages, inheritances. They are contributions on the part of the person who receives those. People always remember those.
Yes.
Things.
And we have done an episode on contributions, so go and listen to that if you want a bigger summary. And if you want to go and, like I said, figure it out yourself, you can go and do our course where we talk you through the contributions, and we've got a spreadsheet that you can work it out on. Or, of course, go see your lawyer. We also have an episode on salary, because some people, Mum, seem to think that if you had the biggest salary during the marriage, you somehow should, that's a bigger contribution, so you get a bigger percentage. That's not the case, is it?
No, it's not the case. And sometimes, I think I've mentioned before, I've been shocked when a lawyer would write a letter to another lawyer saying, my client earned this much money during the marriage and yours only earned this, and here are the tax returns, because salaries don't count as long as you're putting everything towards the marriage. So we've talked about that.
Yeah, so go and watch that episode if you're interested in rebutting that argument. So it comes down to then, Mum, we're going to talk about 4 surprising things you might not realise are contributions. Why do people forget these? Like, why do these get left out?
I think it's that everything else is provable. My client earned more, here's the documents. I had a house, here's the documents. But I think people remember these things because they are dividing up money. That's what you're dividing. And so it's the obvious money in, money out that people focus on. But the Family Law Act has never said it was just that. The Family Law Act has always said there's more to it.
Yes, and there are heaps of other ones that people forget about that we're not going to talk about today. Can you give us a couple examples of those ones, Mum, before we start talking about these 4?
Yeah, okay. Unexpected contributions might be that you've been living with one of the party's parents for a while and got cheaper rent.
Helping with study?
Yes, supporting someone while they go through a degree. And that's one of the really heartbreaking things when one person works, the other person's slaving away at the desk and at night probably learning. And when they get their new qualifications and they go to separate, they don't want to recognise the extra contribution made by the other person who supported them. But those are all other sort of aspects. There are hundreds of things that actually are contributions that you wouldn't think. like even an existing superannuation benefit or, all sorts of stuff.
All right. So really, this is a bit of a warning to anyone out there who is thinking, I'm just going to go and do this myself. I'm just going to arrange it with my ex. We're just going to do what's fair. You might actually not know what's fair because you might not know what contributions you've contributed that actually do count towards property settlement. And we do hear a lot of people who their exes said, oh, my salary, I earned the most, I did the most wage earning, so I'm going to get the bigger part of the property, and these people walk away with hardly anything, and it's not fair. So today we're going to focus on the parenting component of contributions and these 4 surprising ones, Mum. How often do these ones come up?
They should come up more often than they do, Laura. The courts generally, I think, led by the lawyers who appear before them, tend to just downplay them. But there is an obvious component that I think always is an immediate recognition in the lawyer's mind, and that is the contribution to other people's children.
So that's number 1, parenting other people's kids. So, I mean, must be hard. Obviously you've married into a blended family. They already have kids. You take on their responsibility maybe as the stepmom, the stepdad, and you're doing all the work. It does seem to make sense that it is a significant contribution because they are not your children.
That's right. It took a while before the court had a hearing about it, and Rob's case sets out what happened. But in that case, the parent whose kids they were said, I made a contribution as well to my kids. And the court said, yes, but you had to. The other person didn't have to. That was a contribution on their part. So that's, and you do, as step parents, you love the children that you take on, and you do everything for them that you would do for your own kids. And that's how it should be, I should think, because otherwise it seems a bit mean and disconnected. But at the separation, the reality is they weren't your kids. That wasn't your problem.
So how does that reflect as a contribution usually? And again, this is just legal education. Everybody's situation is different. Please go see a lawyer to find out where you stand, because everyone has a different footprint when it comes to this kind of thing. But Mum, how do you see it usually reflected in property settlement?
Well, yes, so it's interesting you raise it, Rose. It is a general thing, and it can change. It's not, oh, there's a Rob's case. Oh, they get an extra 10%. No, the court looks at, and I do when I'm advising, look at how old the kids were when you got together, when you started living together, how long they lived in the house with you. So for instance, your contribution in that sort of situation, if there was a 3-year-old child and you stayed together for 19 years, so that pretty well that child's whole childhood you were contributing. But then, so you think that's quite a big contribution, but then you have to look at, hang on, half the time that child was at the other parent's house, so you discount it there. So it's a very personalised way.
Some people have their other parent, their partner's child 100% of the time, so they're always there. So that would be different to someone who only did half time. What about if they've got special needs or they're high need?
Yeah, well, you'd have to show how you accommodated those higher needs and what you did. It's a different scenario, Laura, if when you get together, your child or their child is 15 and they're pretty well out the door within 3 years, so you would get a much smaller contribution.
But out the door in 3 years, I love that optimism.
I know. No, hang on. You and I are realists. We both know that doesn't happen. But the Family Law Act has this wonderful vision of every child walking away from home fully formed at age 18.
Really? So they just don't, they go, oh, after 18, you're not doing any contributions with that child.
Yeah, but look, under the Commonwealth law, everything that an 18-year-old is an adult, right? Before 18, you're not. This is a Commonwealth court, the family law rules, the Commonwealth, so they're stuck with it. With that thing. So as I said, Rose, it's a real sliding thing. And of course, it might be that you have some children in the relationship that were yours from a previous relationship, and they have a child that was theirs from a previous relationship. But if you've got more than they've got or longer child years raising, then they might get an adjustment because they did more than you did towards theirs.
It really hits me why you see that justice scale now.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
I'd be like, why is there a scale? That makes no sense. But
Yeah.
now I can see, oh, you looked after their children for 5 years and then you did this and you did that, and then they wait to see which way scales balance. So I get that.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
that
That's a
child
really
support.
good analogy.
What about
Yeah.
child support?
Well, the thing we look at with child support is, did the person whose kids were being looked after by you, like they're not your kids, you're helping look after them, is there any child support coming into the house to support those children? Or did you and the other parent support them out of your own money? And if there's reasonable child support coming in, then that lies neutral and they're just looking at your non-financial contributions. But if there's no child support, then there's almost an element there of it's a non-financial contribution, but the money that would otherwise have been coming in wasn't. So the burden on you or your spouse was heavier.
Because we've had this question asked before.
Yeah.
I helped pay for the child support for my ex's children to my ex's ex. Does that get recouped? So they spent 30 grand in child support for the year on somebody else's children. Do they get that back, or does that
Well,
get counted?
that's a grey area, Laura. Surprise, surprise.
Surprise.
Because if you didn't pay it for the children, I suppose your ex, who at the time was the father or the mother of the children, would have had to pay it. So the money would have come out of the household anyway. So sometimes there's an argument is that, he paid child support the whole time we were married, school fees, uni fees, whatever. So that was kind of, had that money gone towards the marriage, you might have bought a block of land or another house or something. So there's that kind of, like you say, it's a pebble maybe on one side or the other. But that's exactly why, that scale analogy is why people say, the court says we're weighing up everything, and it just trying to find out what's just and equitable. That's what the court has to look at. What is the right thing to do between these two?
And I guess it's really important, if you're trying to get the best outcome for yourself that is just and fair, if you don't consider this, you could get an unfair. So you do have to advocate for yourself and say to your lawyers, no, I think this is an important part of what I contributed to the marriage. I think it should be counted. And this
Yes.
gets onto the second most surprising thing that people don't realize is a contribution, and that's just parenting. What parts of that is a contribution, and how do you show that?
But pretty everything you do with the children is a contribution. And if you think of it this way, if you did nothing, then the other person would have had to have done everything. So you're not pulling your weight, so to speak. If you're the person that organises all the appointments for the kids, runs them around to all the places, where they have to go on weekends and stuff like that, that's a contribution. And it's necessary to put that contribution in to balance perhaps the fact that the other person, if they're working more than you do and making a bigger income, their contribution to parenting usually would necessarily be less.
And
so
I
don't
think
forget that.
it's important to note, we've also done an episode on gold diggers and the twist on that, where sometimes the parent is doing all the hard work, they've got the big career, they're making all the money, and they're also doing all the parenting, and sits on the couch and doesn't do anything. And that should count, right? You could point out, look, I'm not only the breadwinner, but I'm also the parent. And how do you show that?
Yes. So the Act is specific about parenting and homemaking, the contributions. It's generally stuff like you should be able to show you answering school emails, perhaps signing in and out of creche, photos of you holding birthday parties for the kids. It's very relevant when you've got a fly in, fly out partner, because you are carrying a pretty heavy load every second week. And not only that, sometimes when they come home from FIFO work, people are really tired and trying to catch up on rest. And so you're still doing all the things. So, so you can show their diaries or show their roster. You can show what degree they might have achieved or the study they've done and the number of hours of study. And if you haven't got a document, you can tell the court, you can say that between this year and this year, this person got 16 subjects down of their degree, and each subject, here's the thing from the uni, says they're supposed to spend 23 hours per unit, and just tell that story. And things like every afternoon or every evening, straight after dinner, they'd be in their office door shut, studying, and I bathed and fed the kids and put them to sleep. Or I always read them their nighttime stories, and sometimes you might have friends who can vouch for that, that you were the one that got up in the night.
I think it's important to note here a warning to anybody who's watching this, who's maybe still in that weird separated at one roof stage, or thinking about separating but haven't yet, but you both know it's happening, or even those early couple of months. There seems to be a tactic, and we've put this in the Narcissist Playbook, where they find out about this parenting actually counts towards contributions. They might have seen a lawyer. And then all of a sudden they're offering, oh, I'll take little Johnny to school today. I'll do pick up and drop off, or things they've never done ever before, ever. And you're like, oh, great. That people are like, oh, that's great. That gives me a bit of a breathe. But why is that a problem? Or why should people be aware of that, Mum?
Yeah, it's often a strategy, isn't it? Generally from the person who says, let's not get lawyers involved. They've already seen one, and they realise that it's looking a bit skewed, and they realise there's a property adjustment in the future as well for future needs, but also contribution. And so they're quickly fixing it all up in a hurry and changing the story. Yep. And the sad thing about that is the kids are excited. And as you say, you're going, great, take some of the load off. But you might find they're very carefully documenting their role. That's why people do it.
Be mindful. And look, I get it. It's hard. If you've just separated, you're probably exhausted and emotionally wrecked, and you probably do welcome, oh great, they're stepping up, but just be mindful that they don't turn the story around and say, look, she does nothing or he does nothing, and I've done all this for the last month or two, which is the truth. But if you looked at it as a whole, it's a tactic. So be aware of that.
Can I just say, Laura, I think if that happens, I think an email to the other person and perhaps put it on the record. I'm really excited that you're able to start picking up little Jimmy from school, and that your job has become flexible about this. I'm very glad to hear it. And perhaps that'll allow me to work another couple of hours on those days, and instead of having to pick them up all the time. A little bit self-serving, you send it to them, but you've made that mark off, that document.
To basically be like, yep, I'm cool for you to help, but this is
That's
a
great.
is a new behaviour. This hasn't been in the past. So then that gets on to number 3.
You're invited to our free webinar. Whether you're stuck at the beginning of deciding to divorce, or you're struggling to find your way through the legal jargon and fear of the unknown of the legal process, we are here to empower you to take control. Join us to learn what steps you can take, followed by a live Q&A where you get Lynn, my amazing mum, and family law accredited specialist to answer your question. All you have to do is go to www.thedivorcecourse.com.au and click on Reserve My Seat. We'll see you there, so don't miss out. Register today.
Stay-at-home mums. We get so many who write into us and say, oh, my ex made all the money, my ex brought everything in, I've been a stay-at-home mum. We did have a lady who tried to calculate what her wage would have been, in her argument against her ex for her divorce. And that's why we did the episode, Salary, Does It Count? Because she was so upset and worried. So, Mum, what do you say to all those stay-at-home mums or stay-at-home dads who are sitting here right now going, I can't leave my partner, or I'm going to end up with nothing in property because I didn't make any of the money?
Spoiler alert, salary is not really a contribution. So you have to think, when the Family Law Act was written in 1975, it was a very different landscape then. Married women were really not supposed to work. They got sacked, usually on marriage, and your role then would be, can you imagine it? Your role then would be to be the homemaker. And that role, even without children, that role of being a homemaker is recognised as a contribution. But if you're a stay-at-home mum or a stay-at-home dad, you're not only keeping house, you're not only supporting the working partner, you are also caring for a child all of the time when, if not for you, this is where I always look at it, if it wasn't for you minding the child during the day or having the child during the day, would that other person be able to have climbed as high as they did in the company, or to have studied as hard? And in the old days, what happened with the marriage was that it became a family enterprise to get the husband as far up the food chain as you could, because then that would bring more money in. Nowadays, we have a slightly different slant on that, and we are wanting our own space and our own lives. But really, though, staying at home as a mother is a valuable resource to the other person. I think, and you may not believe me on this, Laura, I don't know, or you might not agree because we're a whole generation apart, but I think that the higher the income of one person, the more likely it is that they will opt for the other parent to stay home with the children as the best as the best option for the kids. What do you think?
Oh, look, I think it's every situation is different. Everybody's different. Absolutely, every household is different. But yeah, there's some people who go, oh, well, you're earning enough for the both of us. I'll stay home and look after the kids. That's totally fine, because let's face it, two working people and a house full of kids is it's hard yakka, because you come home and you've got to then work at home. I was talking to a teacher the other day and she said, I can't do the younger grades because I won't have the energy when I get home to help my children. So it's all about energy, and effort,
Yeah.
and all of that. And it is pretty hard to get promoted and people take you seriously if you have to leave and go and take the kids to this or go and do that. Or I've got 4 kids, and if one of them's sick, I'm at least called at least once or twice a month to go pick one of them up. So, there's all these elements and everybody's different. But I think because the family court and their legislation was 1975, was it?
Yep.
It really is stuck in the olden days. And
It is.
I know we've had those upgrades recently, but that had nothing to do with this part of it. And I do get that vibe in family court that they are, like, didn't you say they only allowed women to wear pants in the 90s in the courtroom?
Yes. So post about 1999, and I took years to be game to wear trousers. And we had some of the older judges, like they'd say from the back, I can't see you, Miss Such and Such. I can't see you. I can't hear you. And that means that
if you're wearing pants.
Yeah, I refuse. Yeah.
So basically what I'm saying is I feel like the court is about 20 years behind in what's happening. And to be fair, it does take a long time to change legislation. So I get
you
that.
say that. But I don't actually think it's wrong behind in property settlement. I think it placed the value on a stay-at-home parent squarely where it should have, which was equal to a neurosurgeon or an anaesthetist salary. You're also providing that role. I think maybe the homemaker role over time has played less of a part because in the old days, again, as a person climbed the ranks, you would have dinner parties at home. Your role would be to present the house nicely. Whereas now, with the expectation that both parents will have careers once their parenting is over or before they started parenting, I think that keeping the house nice doesn't get much of a play these days. And it is the caring of the children, though, and the not earning a salary that I think should be still part of the process. And I think in the 80s, if anyone looks at any 1980s movies where the women, if they do a job in an 80s movie, everyone's really, isn't that cute? And when I went to court the first time in Bundaberg, they thought I was the court reporter, because they'd never seen a woman lawyer before. These things, that was in the early 80s. So times have changed, and keeping a tidy house isn't just one person's job anymore. It's usually 2 people's.
So the flip side of that is, and I'm going to just bring it out here, the pitfalls of this one. So saying you did all the parenting and then you have an ex who's found out about that it counts. So they all of a sudden start doing all of the things for you that you've always done for decades.
Yeah.
When it comes to keeping the house clean and doing that kind of stuff, I have heard of some arguments where I've seen like people have said in their affidavit, oh, my ex said I was a slob, or I never cooked dinners. And is there a counter argument to the stay-at-home mum contribution or the stay-at-home dad contribution that you've seen that people need to be aware of?
I think so. I think the counter argument is that it is generally a choice made by the couple during the marriage. at the time the children were born, that one person would stay home and one person would work. But that doesn't mean the person who stays home is on duty 24 hours a day and does all the housework and all the parenting. So I think I think it fits in the swings and roundabouts argument. That was a choice that you made during the marriage for that to happen. And yes, you suffered a drop in income from that person, but that was a choice you made. And just the same as one of you had got very promoted in the relationship, that money comes in as well if it turned into a house or something like that, if you use the money. So I think you can argue that.
So it doesn't matter then if in their affidavits or they tell lawyers in lawyer letters, oh, she or he never vacuumed, they never did anything, they weren't a good stay-at-home mum. That doesn't matter really.
Yes. I think lawyers think less of their clients who say that, because I used to call it the big butt argument, where they'd go, oh, he just sat on his big butt or she sat on her big butt and didn't do anything. The court has countless times just said that's not realistic. Honestly, that's not realistic. And if you stayed in the marriage, you've agreed that would happen, that one of you is going to be the drone or whatever it is in the relationship. So you can't go back and rethink decisions that you made during the relationship. The court will assume that that both of you made that decision considering all the options and thinking of your children, and they won't really. And I have heard people go, he wouldn't let me work, or she refused to go back to work, or he refused, those sort of things, unless you've got evidence for it, emails or whatever. And it just doesn't fly.
So if you are one of those people who do think they have the big butt argument, and there's nothing wrong with big butts, but it's the argument where they go, oh, they just sat on their big butt. The Gold Diggers episode, really, Mum does talk about ways to show the court if they did just sit at home all day, have they got gambling accounts or gaming logs that you can show that's literally all they did all day. So go and listen to that episode if you do actually think that argument is valid for you, and you can try and work around that. Now, Mum, you did mention that being a stay-at-home mum or dad, it does mean you're not bringing in as much, but it also means you're bringing in number 4, which is counted as a contribution that people don't realize, is not having super. That's a contribution?
That's right. Well, it is a contribution because you're staying at home, the other person's earning superannuation, and their super is going to go up and up and up, and yours isn't. If that person hadn't made contributions to super, the other person away, then they would have brought that money home, and imagine it could be a savings that you've both had or something like that. That's a little bit off the track, though, I guess. That's why super takes into account. But if you've dropped your own superannuation voluntarily, then it's only right that as a result of your parenting, there should be an adjustment because of the superannuation. I'm wondering if it's an ordinary property one. So I think I put it in there just to say to people, don't forget that you've suffered with super.
And I think that is one thing people really write in about and never get. They say, I won't touch your super, or it's his or her super, she earned it, I'm not entitled to it. So many people just don't even include super in that when they split stuff up. So what you're saying is super counts, and it's to be shared. And if you didn't get any super while you're a stay-at-home mum or a stay-at-home dad, then you need to be allowed to have some as well.
Yeah, and then if people are considering superannuation as a separate pool, then make sure you raise that issue. So what we're doing, of course, is educating people of the things that they need to mention to the other lawyers. It's an insidious thing where people are starting to say, or lawyers are starting to say, oh, let's just equalise the superannuation. We'll make it even. And that might be all right if you're very young and it's a long time till you get your super, but it's not necessarily the way to do it. If you're likely to be getting 60% or 70% of the property pool, which includes super, except for some reason they've taken the super out and you only get 50-50 of the super. So you talk about your contribution in terms of, foregoing superannuation. Because Section 79, we're looking at marriages here, but there's a similar one for de facto. Section 79 of the Family Law Act talks about the property, like Section 79 of the contributions before, during and after, financial, non-financial, about parenting and homemakers. But it also says, and the factors set out in Section 75 too. And that section is your future needs argument. And under that banner, they talk about the extent to which your income and career has been impacted negatively by being married. Okay. And so although it's listed in the future needs section 75, it actually is also referred to in section 79. So that's how you get that in as a contribution.
If you're interested in learning about future needs as part of figuring out your property pool, go and listen to that episode. I'll put that in the show notes as well. But or you can do our course and work through each element. Mum talks you through each one and you can fill in the spreadsheet. Mum, does having a short marriage versus a long marriage affect any of these contributions?
Massively.
Okay.
Massively. Okay. And so some people get offended if a court says it's a short marriage, or if their lawyer goes, oh, that was a short marriage, like it can feel bad. But really, the court is looking at anything around 3, 4, 5 years as a short marriage. And although they don't say that, but the cases seem to say, and in fact, anything under 10 years is still regarded as a short relationship. And
Really?
the extent, that percentage that a person might get after 10 years or 5 years changes depending on the property pool, and changes really with the court, the way the court cases are flowing. I had a case many years ago where the property is split after a 10-year marriage was, I think, 25% to my client. However, only months after that decision, but long enough so there couldn't be an appeal, the court had a case and they said, look, that's not right. There was no contribution other than, they didn't say it about my case, but they lay down some pretty clear guidelines. So short marriages matter. And in parenting, of course, it's the shorter time you're parenting the other person's child. And if you and he have got a child that's, say, under the age of 3 when you separate, the person who's got the child the most, that's a massive contribution on their part, because it'll be for the next 15 years until they magically learn to make the bed, cook their own food, earn their salary and leave.
And what about young people versus old people? Does being like around 60 change these contributions as opposed to being in, like, I don't know, in your 30s?
Look, you know what? If it's a short marriage, possibly not. Really short marriages, the court tends to leave things where they were. Whoever had what at the beginning, they try to restore that. What happens is often with older people, they might even own their own homes. They sell, they set up another home, and they've had a lifetime of accumulating assets, right? And so a very short marriage, 3 or 4 years, the court might just try and give them all back to them. I think if you're both elderly and one has a lot of property and the other one doesn't, you might be at risk for spousal maintenance, like a lump sum spousal maintenance component. But yeah, okay. I think grey divorce, as they call it, I think it's easier because they've seldom got children to consider, seldom got child support to consider. And yeah.
But if it is a grey divorce, do they still count the contribution of raising the children, even though they've all left?
Yes. Oh, if you were married for a long time and there were children, absolutely, they still count that. Good. They still count that. Yeah, I was thinking short relationship in your 60s, you're more likely to just be given back what you had.
Are there any cases, Mum, that are like relevant to this kind of argument that people can go and figure out and maybe point their lawyer to?
Mallets Case is my favourite for that. Yes, but Mallet, I think it's about a 1978 case. So you can imagine the Family Law Act was written. It came into existence about 1976. They had the courts, and then the court was kind of feeling their way about how they would apply this law, and solicitors were having a go for their clients, and it was a big turnaround.
So if anyone is interested in learning about Mallets Case, Mum does on Patreon, which I will put the link in the show notes for because I didn't do that last week.
Yeah.
Mum on Patreon does a little Cases Explained. So you can go and listen to Mallets Case today. You can subscribe to Patreon and then listen to it through Spotify, or you can just watch it online if you'd like to do that. Mum explains Mallets Case a little bit better, which may help you argue your case a little bit better. And if you are self-repped, you can push that across to the other lawyer. Is that right, Mum? And be like,
yes, that's right. Or yep. And if your lawyer's a bit cringy about it, push that to them and say, but what about Mallet's case? Because the judges know about it.
Yeah, so you have been seeing, though, a trend at the moment of maybe younger lawyers or lawyers that aren't family law specialists that are just completely missing the ball when it comes to this kind of contributions. You said a
Mm.
lawyer once sent you an itemized account of the income that the ex had
Oh,
earned over the years. So don't assume that your lawyer knows
mm.
everything,
And it
and
wasn't just one.
yeah, and
It's not just one case.
don't assume that their lawyer knows everything either. So you
Mm.
must go and get legal advice from someone who knows what they're talking about. If you can't afford it, there's community legal. We've got an episode on how to approach that. But also just go and find out where you stand. So, Mum, what do you say to those people who are getting these wrong assessments of the Family Law Act? Because I have this horrible feeling that, because most people settle out of court, they don't even go to
Mm.
court,
I
they go to
do. I know.
mediation or something.
Yeah.
Are there people that are getting property settlement based on the wrong Family Law Act information from these lawyers, thinking that salary counts and that being a stay-at-home parent didn't matter and all this sort of stuff? Is that happening?
Look, you would hope not, because the court ultimately has to find the orders just and equitable, even if it's by consent. What worries me is that the court may not hear about some things because your lawyers may not know to ask. So you have to educate and empower and equip yourself, so that you have to educate yourself so that you know what to bring to your lawyer's attention. And then if they don't ride with it, then you need to give them the cases. I think be your own self advocate. And if you think there's something fishy and you're not being taken seriously, if you reach an agreement and it's filed in the court and these issues are never raised, the court may make those orders. And there you are. They think it's just equitable because it's your responsibility or your lawyer's responsibility to raise all the elements. And what can happen there is that it eats at you. I think if you feel like you were ripped off, you were ignored, you weren't heard, then it can eat at you. There's a thing in America called therapeutic jurisprudence, which I absolutely love the concept of. It started in the mental health space. And if you don't feel heard, no matter how much money you get, you're not going to be happy. So go and get a second opinion. That's what I say. Go and find someone, maybe a lawyer you couldn't afford normally, and just ask for a second opinion. They don't even have to tell your lawyers. And it may be that you are on the wrong track and they'll tell you. And then you can be comfortable with the outcome. Or you might be on the right track and then you can take up that challenge with your lawyer or maybe get new lawyers.
So we have done a great episode called The Pep Talk You Didn't Know You Needed to Have. And in that, talk about this and the process you can take and why you should consider it. Because, Mum, you're right. At the end, you could have buyer's remorse, settler's remorse, where you're just like, oh, I don't know if I made that decision. And I know of people who it has haunted them. And they've messaged us 5 years after, can I change it? Can I do this? And it's too late.
Yeah.
It's too late.
Yes.
Make sure you educate yourself and you really know what's going on. In saying that, we've got a webinar coming up next week, if you're listening to this when we've released it to tomorrow. So if you'd like to come along and you can learn more things, that would be great. You can register on our website, www.thedivorcecourse.com.au, and just click register for this webinar. It's an Aussie one. If you also are interested, you can do our course, which will be opening up in a couple of weeks, where we take you through step by step. Mum explains to you the Family Law Act parts that you need to know about so that you can go and advocate for yourself and know where you stand and find out that information and how to go and see a lawyer and how to get the best out of your divorce property settlement so you don't get ripped off. So, Mum, I want to thank you for educating us, and so people know that parenting other people's kids is a significant contribution. Parenting your own kids is a contribution. Being a stay-at-home parent is a contribution, and missing out on super because you've been working from home or, because you've been looking after the kiddies is also, in a way, a contribution. So I hope that that's helped some of you. I know there's plenty of other ones that, like you said, supporting people who are studying, all of these other things that are contributions we haven't talked about, but I think it was good to talk about those ones today, just in case anyone misses those in their settlement.
Well, even when you listen, Norma, even as lawyer, we do continuing legal education. And so often it's all focused on the dollars and they skim over the work at home and what people are doing at home. And your generation, Laura, are so good at advocating for themselves. So I figured if we put the information out there, then, you know, we'll get back to some respect for the parenting and homekeeping role.
Because it's a tough gig. It's a tough gig.
Oh, my word. Yep.
Particularly if you're doing it and you're going through this kind of crap right now and all the stress, trying to keep your level head when you're parenting with, I don't know, whether it's toddlers, teenagers, babies, you name it. Every stage is hard. You add divorce and separation into that and dealing with lawyers, it's another whole kettle of fish.
Yep. And being broke, probably, and potentially having to move out of the house. I mean, all of the most stressful things that can happen to you are all happening to you at once.
It makes me want to cry just thinking about it.
I know. I remember.
It was so horrible.
I remember looking at you kids and going, oh, my gosh, I'm responsible for these from now on.
I know.
You know,
so, look, we know how hard it is, guys, and we know what you're going through, and we hope that this is helping you a little bit. We have so many other episodes you can go and listen to. We've mentioned a bunch. I'll put them in the show notes. You can go and search our podcast database. It's at thedivorcecourse.com.au/blog. I probably should call it something else. But you can go and search in the search bar in our blog for any topic that you can think of. And we've got at least 100 episodes you can go and find that are relevant to whatever it is that you're going through.
And they're free. So, you know, we've been talking about divorce for hours and hours and hours, hundreds and hundreds of hours.
Yeah. So if
we never run out of topics.
If you've got something going on, we've probably discussed it. And if we haven't discussed it, please email us and we will get something out, because I think it's important that we continue the push to educate and make sure that people like yourself who are watching today get what's fair and don't just get pushed out and hurried out, cookie cutted and ending up just looking back going, well, that wasn't fair. Yeah.
And a lot of it is what you do in those first few weeks, if you can be educated there about not making any big boo-boos for your case in those early stages. And that's what that webinar is about. Yeah. The things that I used to wish my clients had known or hadn't done or had done before they came to me.
Well, I hope to see you guys at the webinar. And if not, if you're interested in the Mallets Case, you can jump over to Patreon and become a member today. And there's lots of things that you get from being a Divorce Course Patreon member. And we will see you all next week. Thank you, Mum.
Thank you, Laura. Goodbye, everyone.
If you found this podcast helpful, we'd love it if you could rate, review, and subscribe. By doing so, you are spreading the word to help someone else just like you. Lynn would like to remind you that this podcast is general advice only, and you should always get legal advice in relation to your particular situation. And remember that the Australian laws may have changed since recording,